Now there's another implication as to what this holiday really is all about. Is it part of Pesach? Isn't it part of Pesach? Are the intermediate days of Sukkot, are they part of Sukkot or not? And that's a simple question. Do you have to eat matzah today? I mean, if it's really part of Chag HaMatzot, the holiday of Matzot, I guess I gotta go out for lunch and eat some matzah. Or at least make sure during this 24-hour period of this particular day of Pesach that I've gotta go out and eat some matzah, shouldn't I? And if it's Sukkot and it's an intermediate day, I can't just have yogurt all day and have a Coke and a drink and a little snack bar. I've got to go in and go into that sukkah. Maybe eat a piece of bread on Sukkot and eat a piece of matzah on Pesach. Don't I have to do that? Isn't that part of what the day is all about? Well, if you look in the Code of Jewish Law, he doesn't seem to think so. Code of Jewish Law, we have here the laws of Pesach, eating matzah. Let's see what he says. He says, "Ein chiyuv achilat matzah ela b'layla rishon bilvad." You don't have an obligation to eat matzah, only on the first night, nothing else. V'af b'layla rishon yotzei b'chazai. Even in the first night, you eat one olive's worth, about a third of a matzah. That's it. You're done. So that's what he says there in the laws of Sukkot. He reiterates this point and says regarding Sukkot as follows. Let's see. There it is in the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch. Achilat b'sukkah, ratzah, he says, on the other days of Sukkot, after the first night, ratzah lechol b'sukkah, suda, if you want to eat a meal, then you osoed b'sukkah, you have to eat in the sukkah, but ratzah, ochel, if you don't want to, you don't have to eat a meal on Sukkot, in the sukkah, and the other days after the first night. Ella, perod u'playot, chutz la'sukkah ochel. You want to just have fruit, you live on a salad diet, go ahead, eat outside the sukkah the whole week. Of course, they're a little different though, aren't they? When I do go in the sukkah during Sukkot, I make a bracha. I bless God who commanded us to eat in the sukkah if I eat during the intermediate days. But if I eat a matzah, if I go home now and eat matzah for lunch, I'm not going to make a bracha on that matzah. I make a motzi, but I'm not going to say matzah. I'm not going to thank God for giving us the mitzvah of matzah, because somehow when it comes to eating that matzah, it's not an absolute obligation, is it? Doesn't seem like an absolute obligation. But there are the other voices, dissenting voices. The Vilna Gaon, one of the great geniuses of the last 300 years, he said that look, the Torah seems to say that Shivat Yamim Tochal Matzot, many times over and again, the Torah says 7 days you should eat matzah. Now the rabbis may have interpreted that it doesn't really mean that you absolutely have to go home today and eat lunch, but it's a reshut, at least it's some sort of obligation, it's some sort of option. You could go, as you could go into the sukkah and eat a meal, you could eat matzah. So go ahead, says the Gemara, go eat matzah today, and it's a mitzvah, and have in mind that you're going to get a mitzvah. Maybe you have to eat the shmura matzah for lunch, but try to fulfill the mitzvah with eating at least one piece of matzah each day, says the Vilna Gaon. And based on that, the Mishnah Brura, the great authority, the Chafetz Chaim, Yisrael Meir Kagan, he says, well wait, maybe that should apply in Sukkot too. If the Vilna Gaon thought that it's an obvious thing that you had to eat some matzah on Pesach every day, maybe it's pretty obvious that you should go out of your way. As one rabbi in the Mishnah suggested, that every day you should eat some meals in the sukkah, every day, as some sort of a option or obligation of some sort, albeit on Pesach without a bracha, but you've got to do it. The Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim, in the Guide to the Perplexed, which is not a legal book, but it does reflect Jewish philosophy and thinking. There in the third section, in chapter 43, he says, Pesach, in Yonam Mefursam, everybody knows about Pesach, and it's 7 days. Now the eating of matzah, he says, if it was just 1 day, we wouldn't feel the eating of matzah, the celebration of Pesach. Because a lot of times you change your diet for 1 day. You know, tonight, let's have meatloaf tonight. You know, that's just the way it goes for one night. But if you eat it for 7 days, then it becomes very well known, very obvious that today is Pesach, and it becomes a different type of an experience. So the Rambam does seem to imply that you're supposed to eat matzah for 7 days. It's part of the whole experience of Pesach to eat matzah for the 7 days, and there are some implications in the Talmud also. that the 7 days are a time of eating matzah. So there are some views along those lines. The Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, says that the 7 days of Pesach, in what sense are there 7 days of Pesach? Well, for the matzah and for the sacrifices. We have special sacrifices in the Holy Temple today. If there was a Holy Temple, we would have in Jerusalem special sacrifices as outlined in Book of Numbers, in Parshat Pinchas. But he says the 7 days are for matzah and sukkah. That there is such a thing as matzah on 7 days of Pesach. So the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, the great medieval authority from Germany and later from Spain, he also thinks that there's got to be some kind of concept of eating matzah on Pesach, even during the intermediate days. The intermediate days are not removed from the mitzvahs of the holiday. It is Pesach. We do eat matzah today, according to some views, but not according to the code of Jewish law. The most authoritative opinion is that, no, even on Chol Hamoed, you don't have to sit in the sukkah really if you don't have any bread, and you don't have to eat matzah on the intermediate days of Pesach. Now, based on these two questions, we can reach a third issue. But first I wanted to just let you know that if you'd like to email me about any of the things we're discussing or just to say hello, I'm at rabbijmf at gmail.com, rabbijmf@gmail.com. So you're welcome to email any questions or comments you may have, and may be able to read them live as well if possible. So based on these two issues, is there a prohibition of some sort of work, not a total prohibition, but some sort of work on these days? And are matzah and sukkah applicable and obligatory during these 7 days? Based on this, there's another law which rests based on this and is dependent on these two questions. And what's that? Do we wear tefillin today or not? Men are commanded that every day of the year we wear tefillin, except on Shabbat and Yom Tov, we do not wear tefillin. We do not wear tefillin. Why not? Because on Shabbat, Shabbat itself is a sign, so you don't need the sign of the tefillin on the head and the hand. We have another sign. Shabbat is oti, it is a sign. We don't need the tefillin on Shabbat. So of course we don't wear tefillin on Shabbat and Yom Tov as well. The Gemara says so in Eruvin. Now, what about Chol Hamoed? What about today? Should I have this morning, tomorrow morning? Should I put on the tefillin or not? Well, let's think about that. If there's a prohibition of work, then I suppose on a day when there's a prohibition of work, shouldn't be wearing tefillin. You have enough of a sign by virtue of some limited prohibition of work. Or if I'm eating matzah and sitting in a sukkah today, or on Chol Hamoed Sukkot, then that should be a sufficient sign. Shouldn't have to wear my tefillin as a sign. I have a piece of matzah for lunch or dinner, breakfast, and that should suffice to be the sign of the day, connection between me and God. Let's see what the authorities have to say about this. The Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, the great authority we mentioned before, compiler of the laws of the Talmud, he says, look, no work, no sign, and therefore you got to wear your tefillin. In other words, on these days, he believes that there's no Torah prohibition. He agrees with the Tosfot. There's no Torah prohibition against work on Chol Hamoed. That's a rabbinic idea. The rabbi said that you should prohibit work on these days, but really, according to Torah law, there's no prohibition. If there's no Torah prohibition of work, that's the real sign that would have gotten us out of tefillin. The fact that there's no Torah prohibition on work means I've got to put on my tefillin. And that's the Ashkenazic way. That's that we Ashkenazim, we put on the tefillin, generally speaking, on Chol Hamoed. Now he did say before that there is a mitzvah to eat matzah. There may be, but that's not enough to say that that's a sign, and I have to, and I don't have to wear tefillin. The matzah is not enough to exempt me from the tefillin. The Rashba, a great authority who actually lived at the same time as the Rosh in a different part of Spain, the Rashba says, no, I disagree, he says. I think the Talmud in Chagiga clearly says that there's a Torah prohibition against work. And the Talmud implies that on Moed Katan, page 11b as well, that there's a Torah prohibition of work on Chol Hamoed. If there's a Torah prohibition of work on Chol Hamoed, then what do you need tefillin for? And following in his footsteps, all the Sephardic Jews never wear tefillin. And in Israel, the custom is not to wear tefillin on Chol Hamoed.